SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Italy, one of Europe's biggest and most mature gambling markets, has undergone a significant shift after reforms from the government of Giorgia Meloni. New licensing fees, domain restrictions and other compliance measures have taken their toll, and the number of licensees has shrunk. Meanwhile, in Romania, efforts are underway to raise the legal gambling age from 18 to 21. So why is Europe getting much tougher gambling regulations in 2025, and what does it mean for the biggest operators and the rest of the world? Welcome back to iGaming Daily, supported by Optimove, the creator of positionless marketing and the #1 player engagement platform. I'm Charlie Horner, and today I'm joined by SBC Media's editor-at-large, Ted Menmuir, and the editor of iGaming expert, Joe Streeter. Ted, thanks for coming on. How are you doing?
Very well, Charlie. Good to be back here on our Monday podcast.
Yeah, the usual Monday morning.
The Monday gag, yeah.
Regulation crew. And Joe, welcome to the regulation slot. How's things?
Yeah, all good, Charlie. And forgive me for kind of sidetracking the pod, but every now and then the universe aligns, and you've put me on a podcast with Ted Menmuir on the same day as it was confirmed that Anthony Joshua will fight Jake Paul. Ted, I need immediate reaction very briefly to that fight because, boy...
I did not know that. Is it a joke or...?
Fully confirmed.
Right. Stop the press. Stop the world.
Stop the press, right? Stop the press. Crazy.
Go. iGaming Daily breaking news.
Joe, how many times do I have to tell you this is not TalkSport?
Right, anyway, bringing us safely back to the topic at hand, because, Ted, Italy has reformed its online gambling sector. Could you just kick us off by telling us what the changes are, why have the lawmakers sought to change up one of Europe's biggest markets?
So on Friday, Italy launched what was exactly kind of a 2-year reorganisation. It's the first phase of its reorganisation decree of the gambling sector. And 52 licenses were launched who have taken on a 9-year concession, replacing the old regime. And we've now seen these licenses participate in a new regime that will cost them 7 million euros for 9 years. And with new kind of compliance features across the board, and to be kind of overseen by a new kind of regulatory structure led by the ADM, Italy's monopolies and customs agency. And this really kind of marks the start of a new era for Italian gambling, and one that recognizes that the transition is moving from land-based to online. We've pretty much seen every tier 1 operator in European PLC pitch for a license in Italy. So there is quite a deep competitive makeup to how the market is structured. And I think analysts kind of view that on a yearly basis, what we're going to see is that transition take on Italian online gambling growing by 1 billion in wagering per year. So the competition, the grounds for competition is there. It's attractive, to say the least.
It's certainly attractive to the big players, that's for sure, and I've got no doubt that all the big PLCs will want to be in there. But Joe, does 7 million euros seem like a pretty high barrier to entry for, say, some of the newer operators who might want to come into Italy? And do you think that's contributed to the fact that the number of licensees has dramatically dropped to now 52 for what is Europe's second biggest market, probably behind the UK, particularly in online terms anyway?
Yeah, you raise a good point that it is one of the biggest markets in Europe, and I think as such the framework needs to be adequate to fit that. It can't be a wild west. And I think the high fee is essentially fit for purpose for what they're trying to achieve with this framework, right? They want to streamline the amount of big players that are in the space. They want to kind of have a clearer oversight and more clarity over the main operators. And I think also integral to that increasing the oversight and getting a kind of a strong hold on the market is the abolition of the skins model. I think this could go it's quite a significant way to ending the fragmentation of the market. It's really clear that there's kind of an appetite for not just change in Italy, but like Ted said, a full reset. And yeah, that's coming. And I think with the high fee as well, I think it kind of finds the right balance, because obviously part of the incentive of the change is also to continue the economic uplift that comes through regulated gambling. And yeah, through such a high fee, they can do that whilst also kind of honing in on the specific players that they want.
I'd just like to add to what Joe has said. Look, from the start of this process, the Meloni government has been very clear that it wanted a high fee, high entry point for its gambling market. As Joe mentioned, one of the kind of liabilities that it viewed was just too many skin sites, really kind of cutting down on the market, selling one product, really confusing the consumer as to whether they were playing on a legal or illegal website. So it's bringing much kind of clearer transparency to that. I think they should be kind of credited as to they told the licenses that this was the plan of the market in 2023, and they're stuck by that plan up to 2025.
It sounds from what you're both saying that this is a legislation that or a regulation that is looking to lead the light in Europe. They acknowledge that they're a tier 1 license, that this is a market that everyone wants to be in. So they're raising the barriers for entry accordingly. They're taking their seat at the top of the table as they perceive that they should be. Ted, would you agree with that?
Yes. Look, Italian gambling isn't, it isn't an easy market. It is high taxed, right? But I think what they've done very well is that they've set kind of the boundaries well, and they've been very transparent. So these are the terms of play. This is what we accept, and this is the conduct that we want out of each operator. They're stuck to that. Now, yes, if you go back and you talk to the licenses, there are still lots of points of conflict. The number one being the dignity decree and the prohibition of advertising and sponsorships in Italian sports that they hope will be fixed in 2026. In terms of the market itself, it's probably Europe's most tax-effective gambling economy. And also, I think one of the factors that's been forgotten, especially from outside analysts, is that the ADM has invested a particular sum and is willing to invest a particular sum of millions to secure that market and to protect. And to, I think next year, one of the key projects that's going to undertake is this protective shield. So, look, if you pay that high licenses, they are going to ring fence a lot of the market for you. It is going to be, they are looking to make it Europe's most protected market for the licenses. I view that as a positive.
And Joe, did you have something to add there?
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the dignity degree, Ted, because I think that's an example of how, like you say, Charlie, that the Italian market has kind of tried to step ahead in Europe and kind of tried to lead the line, if you like. Conjecture around sports sponsorship and gambling sponsorship in sport was rife, and it was rife for many years, and it still is in many markets. Italy was certainly felt like one of the first to kind of take this really proactive approach with the dignity decree. So yeah, that hasn't probably worked out how they would like, but yeah, it's interesting that there are changes coming on that front too. But I do think to what you say, Charlie, Italy does have something of a precedent for taking a forthcoming approach and trying to lead from the front.
Mm-hmm. And talking about leading from the front, something that I'm not sure has been trialed in too many countries, and there's definitely a conversation about in the UK to much backlash, is this whole digital ID thing. So operators must now enable player registrations via the digital ID card in Italy, as per the ADM. Ted, this seems like this could have an undesired effect. I guess the industry might say something black market. What do you think? It is Safer Gambling Week, by the way, so I do want to say that this is under the guise of play protection, but are there adverse effects that could have come from this?
Look, I think you've got to kind of divide this into two sections. Yes, there is kind of a a protective layer to it, but there's also kind of a protective layer against the black market and using kind of the digital registration ID to say, I can only process transactions that are from Italian consumers, from Italian citizens via these banks. It's kind of, I think the Italian government views this as kind of the binding protocol across banks, media, and kind of the elementary transactions of gambling. Uh, the other thing is that we don't. The big project here is what it's going to announce kind of at the start of next year with regards to the cyber shield for gambling and that kind of layer of protection for the gambling licenses. Again, the Italian government recognizes just what a big contributor of tax gambling is, and it's willing to invest to protect that revenue. We haven't seen this in other markets, and I reckon that's why we've seen quite a dip in kind of channelization, especially of the bigger or the kind of the VIP customers. I think it should be welcomed.
Okay. Just before we go to a break, then I'll ask you both this now. Are there lessons that the UK could take from Italy, because they're two huge markets, two of Europe's leading markets, both looking to reform in different ways? It seems like Italy is going down the right path. Is the UK? Joe, we'll come to you on this one.
Yeah, of course. I think, as with any market in Europe at the moment, yeah, I mean, that's the added consequences of this, right? We see it in France, even markets like Estonia that are taking an alternative approach to tax and are very different to that of the UK or Italy. There are lessons to be learned, and there are kind of principles being set. Does this work? What is the right approach? So, yeah, for sure, there will be lessons that will be learned, and I think the dignity decree is another example of that. Again, sorry to bring it up, but where the outright ban on sports sponsorship didn't quite work, and off the back of that, other markets kind of evolved their approach to sports sponsorship regulation. So 100%, the eyes of Europe will very much be on Italy as they embark upon this reform.
For me, I'd say that what not just the UKGC, but any regulator could learn from the Italian market is that you can return and you can revise laws, and especially if they're not working. The other thing is that you have to look at gambling restrictions and gambling policy in a much more fluid manner. It's not a black and white outcome. It's what can be kind of fixed at the right time for the consumer. And I think Italy's done that, and it's fixing that in place. Also, regulating gambling needs investment from the top down. You need better systems. You need to see that the licenses are kind of checking in these processes. And again, something that I've always kind of stood by. Yes, tough enforcement, right? But fair terms of play for the licenses themselves.
Excellent. Well, Ted, Joe, we'll park the Italy discussion for now, and we'll go for a break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about what's happening in Romania.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
Welcome back to iGaming Daily. We're turning our attention now to what's happening in Romania, because there are proposals to raise the legal gambling age from 18 to 21. Ted, I'll come to you because I think you wrote this one up for SBC News on Monday. Who's driving these proposals, and what are the motives behind them?
Look, there's no hiding for Romania. I think it's coming to its reckoning with gambling and in what direction it wants to take its gambling. It's the governance of gambling, the governance of licensing, in which direction it wants to go. 2025 has just been a year of fiascos, starting from January all the way up to November. And look, it really contrasts with Italy, where you see a government taking control of gambling and how it wants gambling to be governed, versus Romania, which just seems in a state of chaos and in a state in which nobody and no authority or political party no longer trusts the Office of Gambling, the ONJN.
Mm-hmm. We'll get into the parliamentary situation because it is particularly fragmented, but I'll just say that it is the Liberal Party in Romania who's driving these changes.
Sorry, I should answer the question. Yes, it's the Liberal Party. There's a new coalition in charge of Romania, and the top party is the Liberal Party, and it's submitted its first proposal. Its partner party, Save the Romanian Union, has also submitted proposals too.
So it is the Liberal Party who are pushing these reforms through. But Joe, this doesn't seem particularly liberal to me. Raising the gambling age from 18 to 21. What do you think the arguments against doing this are? So listeners will be aware that in most jurisdictions in Europe, the gambling age is 18, but obviously in the States, it's mostly 21. So what do you think the arguments for and against are?
Well, it feels like a token effort, right? It feels just like a show of incentive that the rules will be tightening. Can I just confirm the PNL is right in Romania that is the lead party that is driving this? Is that a Christian Democratic Party or no?
No, they're actually pro-European. It's the Liberal Party.
Okay, I wasn't sure on that front. But yeah, I think the main argument really is the case studies, right? It would make Romania only the second EU country to raise the age from 18 to 21. I think the other is Greece. There might be a few kind of small exceptions for domestic residents in there, but largely Greece is the most obvious case study. And gambling rates amongst younger people, problem gambling rates amongst younger people in Greece, they're not a shining example of why this would work. So, yeah, I don't know about this. I think it's more a case of showing an incentive to that they're kind of tightening regulations against the industry.
Yeah, well, that's obviously the arguments for is of course that you need to protect younger players because they're financially, emotionally vulnerable. They can be more at risk to problem gambling. But Ted, I talked about it earlier that the Romanian Parliament is an incredibly fragmented coalition, particularly since the elections that happened this year. Is there a consensus between all coalition partners on raising the legal gambling age, or do you think there's going to be compromises that need to be made in this?
Look, first of all, got to underline here that there's two draft proposals, and actually, what the panel is saying is that their first proposal is to increase the age from 18 to 21. I think the minister that proposed it said it was something about protecting youth from harm at the most kind of vulnerable age from 18 to the most vulnerable age of 18 to 21 of adulthood. And look, fine, these all parties can submit individual proposals. You're not sure whether they're going to get accepted. I think that the fundamental flaw in Romania is that the governance and the oversight of Romania just is non-existent at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And I said this earlier, that this is under the guise of player protection and protecting younger people because they're often more vulnerable to problem gambling. And it is Safer Gambling Week as well, so I think it's important that we talk about these things. But it reminds me of something that we spoke about a few weeks ago, Ted, after the Dutch elections. Where is this liberal approach to gambling regulation? Where are the alternatives to just increase regulation and provide more restrictions on what operators can and can't do and what consumers can and can't do? Because it seems to me that is the way that most European leaders are viewing this at the moment. Do you want to take this one first and then we'll go over to Joe?
Yeah, look, I think you're right to kind of raise concerns on this. And I think, look, in a kind of fair and balanced world, you'd say regulate first, then put in the protections that are needed. But I actually do think that in a lot of Eastern European countries, they do look at their economic structures and view that there is some kind of exposure to harm, particularly at those ages. The other thing is that every country transitions differently in terms of the gambling regime. And especially, look, as we've seen in Italy, it's very much, they're going through their generational transfer very rapidly from land-based to online. That's happening in other economies too. And I think, Romania would be another jurisdiction that kind of matches that. Another huge impact in Romania is the economic structure is very different between rural towns and the big cities and what people get paid. And it's much harder for them to actually form kind of binding laws that can kind of accommodate rural communities and big cities. These are all kind of factored in. However, it's very, very hard for a government to make these critical decisions if it has just no regulatory oversight. People have to remember a regulator is not there just to do enforcement. It has to provide a kind of a policy oversight of what is correct and what can be kind of transmitted onto the market.
Mm-hmm. And Joe, we'll come to you now. Where do you see the liberal side of gambling regulation from? Because it seems to me that we are in an age of restriction rather than promoting a market.
Yeah. A few points to get to there, Charlie, really. Firstly, kind of responding to what Ted said. And I think there is a challenge for the Romanian government when the country is so vastly different in so many different areas. I think now if you look at 18-year-olds, the age of 21 as a gambling age seems quite outdated, because when you get to 18, with the existence of the black market and kind of the digital infrastructure and knowledge that exists among even younger than 18-year-olds, but at 18, you've got that digital knowledge. If you want to gamble at 18, there is an avenue to do that. So it's the right time to introduce the regulated market. But yeah, it's obviously difficult to govern a region a country that is so different across the spectrum on things like that. But in terms of the political framing, it's a good point, and I think even when kind of there is political support for the industry, it's framed in a way that is, I mean, we've seen it in the UK, right? It's framed in a way that is to support horse racing or to support to ensure that sports sponsorship doesn't fall by the wayside. Scarcely is it framed in a way that is simply because people should kind of have the right to gamble if they want to, and gambling is an okay pastime. It doesn't seem like one that does ever really garner political support, even though it is such an engaged with pastime and act of leisure, if you like, for so many. So yeah, I don't know where it comes from really, Charlie, to be honest.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting debate, and I'm sure that Ted and the team will be keeping up to date with all of the latest developments in Romania as these drafts continue their way through the Parliament on SBC News. But for now, Ted, Joe, thank you very much for taking the time to talk about Italy and Romania. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in to today's episode of iGaming Daily, and come back tomorrow to keep up with all the latest global gambling news.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.